Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Breakdown.
It's Die Hard in the middle of nowhere. We're out here, we're on the plains, we're in the desert. We're not in the plains, what am I saying? We're in the desert, it's very hot.
Are you confused between
I don't know.
reality and fiction?
Interestingly, this movie, the main character is from Boston. I noticed the plates. So how appropriate that in their drive to California, we, Phil and Liam, are in California talking to our friends, Justin and Laura Koo of Cows in the Field in Boston.
Hey.
Hello.
That is us. We are in Boston.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Where's Laura? Did she disappear? No, she's right there.
I've lost Laura a few times on a road trip. It's scary.
I've gotten in a few 16-wheelers. And just
Do you
been
guys
"Bye."
like road trips?
Yeah.
We
I have
used
some
to before
fun memories
kids.
of road trips with my parents that we would do like these 18-hour drives, and it was hectic.
My family did the opposite. My family was like, if it was a 5-hour drive, they're like, we got to break this baby up. Like, we can't sit in the car with kids for 5 hours straight. So we'd make it like an overnighter thing and like do 3 hours one day and 2 the next. My parents had no interest in being in a car with us for longer than a couple hours.
Those are
So.
80s, 90s parents. They're like, I'm not that interested. It's like, it's a few hours. Now it's like, are you okay? Do you need water? What do you need? Anyway, I digress. Look, for our listeners, you've probably heard us talk about Cows in the Field before, but Cows in the Field is one of my favorite podcasts. It explores, and Justin and Laura, let me know if I'm getting this right, the philosophy behind mainstream films.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's always insightful and always exciting. And personally, I'm a huge fan for a variety of reasons, but one reason is that you covered my favorite movie of all time, Lars von Trier's Dogville, which is a movie rife for conversation. I know I'm a sick person that I said that that's my favorite movie, Laura.
Great
I know.
movie. It's a great movie.
It's one of the great movies, but it's
Did not think you were going to say that.
well,
I
and
know,
also,
you had us in suspense there for a second. I wasn't
Really?
sure where you were going to go.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I love all the movies. Aliens, I love that episode. I'm a huge fan, and we're really, really, really happy to have you here.
Could we do an episode? I'm sorry to invite myself on, but could we do an episode about the philosophy behind my favorite movie, Mannequin, which
Okay.
I think would be a fantastic
yeah.
substantive discussion.
Put it on the calendar.
Put it on
we
the
can
schedule.
definitely
I've
do
never
it.
seen it.
I thought you were
going to
say Vanilla Sky, because I found out today how much
We just
Phil
had that
loves the film Vanilla Sky.
conversation
Vanilla
off
Sky.
mic.
Are you like
We were
an
talking
Abra los
about-
Ojos Sky and Vanilla Sky, or just
kind
Vanilla
of,
Sky?
but I've always equated it to, people say that, but it's like, it's okay that Jimi Hendrix covered All Along the Watchtower, and it could actually enhance the song. That's how I kind of look at like Vanilla Sky, and it's not a popular opinion. The reason that came up was because we were talking about Kurt Russell in his sort of mid-career pseudo-intellectual phase, of which he plays this character, as opposed to his, the Snake Plissken, era of his career. So that's kind of why that conversation came up. We love your show. We're really excited to have you guys on to talk about this movie, which I think actually does have quite a lot of going on in terms of, if you look beyond the surface, I think there's actually quite a lot of interesting stuff philosophically and psychologically. What are you guys' history with this movie? Had you ever seen it before we invited you on for this?
Yeah, I chose it. You gave me the list. I chose
That's right.
Breakdown. Laura,
Oh, right.
Laura would not have chosen this movie because
I have no memory of watching it.
Yeah.
You tell me we've watched it together. You showed it to me, and I must have been really tired. I think I fell asleep. No memory. I think I have remembered the first 10 minutes of it, and then it was all new to me. I had so much fun.
Yeah, to me, this is a movie that I watched a lot as a kid. I saw it a lot of times on TV. I would dip in and out. It was, it was on playing constantly on Showtime or whatever. And I think it's just a great, steady, not groundbreaking, but knows kind of exactly what it wants to do, and super satisfying movie. And it's the kind of movie that gets talked about a lot in the context of movies that were made in the 90s that aren't made anymore. I feel like it's a really good example of that. So I really enjoy it.
Yep. And Liam, was it a first time watch for you, this? Or
No,
you've seen it before?
I have a very distinct memory of watching this movie on VHS like the week it came out. I got it at the video store and watched it with a buddy on a Friday night. I don't think I'd seen it in its entirety since then. I imagine there was like a hungover TBS Sunday afternoon viewing sometime in my 20s, but I can't narrow that down. I did, interestingly, tell my wife, who's not like a big action head, I was like, you might like this one. It's like kind of a down-home thriller, 90s thriller. And she was like, kind of disturbed by it. Like she thought it was, and that was personally my feeling, is it was a lot more intense and, what's the word? Like, it's a harrowing experience watching this movie. It's a lot more harrowing than I was kind of like, oh, Kurt Russell's wife goes missing. Like, it had been so long.
You know what I
and then
think
I was like,
is
holy
so
shit.
terrifying about it is, and we'll talk about this when we get to the section on the villain, it's the casual nature of the evil, I think. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, it's so sort of subtly insidious. It becomes more grand and bombastic as the movie goes on, but at first it's just like a very, very unsettling experience, My experience with this movie, I remember seeing, I must have been, when did this movie come out? 97, right? So I think I was about 15, 16. I was on vacation with my parents in some Spanish island, and in their local bar, I wasn't old enough to drink, but that you could go and sit and, have a Coke and they had all the pirate movies had just come out, basically, were playing on video in this bar. So this was a point in my life when I was just gorging movies nonstop. So I was thrilled about this, and these movies hadn't come out yet. And I remember it was like Mars Attacks, Con Air, Breakdown, and Anaconda were amongst the
Whoa.
the smorgasbord that I was treated to during that week. And I would just sit at the bar, and I remember just watching this movie and being completely. It just grabs you. It's just such a strong setup. It's just so clean and simple and effective that straight away you're just like, wow, what's going to happen? There's so much suspense. There's so much mystery. What's going to happen? What's really going on? All of that stuff. And it just had me. So I remember seeing it, loving it. I don't think I'd revisited it until I did it, watched it for this. And as I said on X, this movie is better than Citizen Kane. I think it's absolutely sensational. But to your point, just I think you're right on the money.
Citizen Kane. I have to.
It is.
Wait,
it's definitively.
What are
better.
you talking about?
It's absolute. No. What I mean is like
podcast over.
It's just as Justin was saying. It's a perfect organism, right? Like of what it is as a mid-tier, mid-budget, star-driven action thriller. It's such a, it just nailed for me. It's such an incredibly crafted example of what it is. It isn't that necessarily that ambitious, but for what it's trying to achieve, it's just beyond a bullseye. So yeah, I love this movie.
Right. There's no fat on the movie. It's lean. Yes. It gets into it and it gets in and out really quickly. And I really appreciate that. And there's no lingering like, oh, what's the next phase of this journey or whatever. It's like, who cares? We dipped in, we went through this experience with these people, and now we're out. And I think that's what's a breath of fresh air in today's movie climate, where everything has to be really grandiose and think very highly of itself. This movie knows it's disposable entertainment, and I really appreciate that aspect of it.
It's interesting that you did say Citizen Kane, because as I've talked to you about, in our chats about the show, I've been having a John Ford summer. I've been watching a lot of John Ford movies for the first time, and an actual really interesting, and I think a better movie than Citizen Kane, actually comparison for this is The Searchers, which is his great, movie of John Wayne trying to find his niece who's been kidnapped by Comanche. Now that is obviously a very substantive movie, but this movie is somewhat situated in a neo-noir Western kind of, vibe. There's a real trajectory from Westerns to this kind of movie with its sort of minimalist approach, and it's almost poetic in how sparse it is at times.
Yes, I think that's the genius of the film. There's an expression I've heard, and I think this came from football, soccer. Simplicity is genius. The more you can distill something down to its core essence, Oftentimes, actually, it's not overcomplicating it. It's actually the distillation to its lean simplicity that is often an example of the art form at its highest level in some respects. So let's talk a little bit about the our fast facts.
Let's do some fast
facts. Just to put this in a little bit of context, Breakdown was released in the US by Paramount on May 2nd, 1997. Which was approximately 4 months after our last film, The Relic, almost 9 years now after Die Hard. Produced by Dino De Laurentiis and Martha De Laurentiis, directed by Jonathan Mostow, who co-wrote the screenplay with Sam Montgomery, and of course it stars Kurt Russell, Kathleen Quinlan, JT Walsh, MC Gainey, and Jack Noseworthy. On an estimated budget of $36 million, it grossed $50 million, receiving positive reviews and gone on to gain a pretty substantial, I think, cult following. I mean, when I did throw up that, I mean, obviously I'm being glib about Citizen Kane, but it did start like quite an interesting, engagement on social media where people actually really dig this movie. And I think you're so right that it's just like, if you were to say to people, how would you describe the movies of the 90s? It's like, look at this. It almost encapsulates everything. And as you're saying as well, there's an element to there's a slight yuppie and peril crossover to this film.
Mm-hmm.
That genre, this is like a yuppie and peril thriller, but with the volume turned up to 10. But the reason we're talking about this film on the show is because our show is about Die Hard, and some people might be scratching their heads and wondering, what's the connection between this film and Die Hard? What's it got to do with Die Hard? Which we like to analyze in a section called
Die Hard DNA. Phil, that was an extraordinary amount of setup for that line. I was like, when am I saying it? When am I saying it? Anyway, this is basically a radio show at this point.
So I'll get on with the, the things that I caught, and then I'd love to kick it over to you guys, see if there's anything that you... sorry, we're getting those crazy... we're doing a Zoom today, so we're getting like those random, like, balloons and thumbs up.
I love it. You're this erudite philosopher, but you love, like, a nice little meme or something that pops up there. Yeah,
it was just me drinking my tea here, and then it made...
It's just killing your rap. It's killing the rap that you... It's okay. It's the good stuff.
So the first element of Die Hard DNA I would suggest is, like, you've got the classic regular guy caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. His wife is taken hostage by a fiendish criminal mastermind who's motivated by money. Despite being outnumbered and outmatched, this everyman hero battles back against the hostage taker and his ruthless henchman, takes the fight to them. These are all elements of Die Hard. You've also got a couple of other interesting ones. A villain pretending to be someone else to try and confuse the hero, right? That occurs in both movies with the classic Bill Clay scene, here with the JT Walsh character pretending that he is, I suppose, essentially gaslighting Kurt Russell, right? That he's, I've never seen you before and all of that. You've got the police being ineffective, unhelpful, slow on the uptake, and sort of impotent, right, in this way that they are in Die Hard as well, right? Although I think the cop character is quite interesting, quite kind of believable. He's not just he's neither good or bad. Yeah, the Rex Linn character, he's sort of neither good nor bad. He's just like a functionary, So I think that was kind of interesting. So all of which means you have this isolated hero who has to rely on his wits and improvise, using limited available items to create makeshift weapons and all of that. So although, again, on face value, I say this isn't like a Die Hard honor scenario per se, because it's an expansive, more of an expansive movie, I think at its core, husband, wife, criminal mastermind, improvisation, all of those things, and the police's irrelevance to the inability to help him, all of which I would say, that's my argument as to why I would say this is a relevant movie. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, or any additions? Or
I think that's all great. Sorry,
I was just thinking, I hadn't actually really registered the scene until you said it again, talking about the impotence of the police. But the scene where he goes to try to report his wife, and there's the huge cork board of missing people.
Ooh, yeah.
That is such a gut punch.
Yeah.
And it's the moment where you're like, well, he's definitely on his own. Like, because the way the cop is just like, I don't know. We'll put it up there. We'll keep our eyes peeled. Like, he's going to do absolutely nothing. And it feels so hopeless. And it also really feeds into that paranoia later of like, are they in on it? Like, what is going on with this weird town of Hatchet? But yes, that was a really effective scene. It really kicks us off to being like, Kurt Russell's gonna have to do this all by himself.
I love that it's named Hatchet. It's like, don't stop in that town. Don't stop in a town named Hatchet.
One of the other things I like about it, and I think this just builds on what you're saying, Phil, is that the film highlights his failures. So it's Kurt Russell's character of Jeff, his failures. So throughout, like, just to give a couple examples, he's captured by the villains. Like he escapes down the river, and then he kind of retreats back to spy on them, and then he's captured by Billy or whatever. He's knocked out by Billy. When he also in the bathroom, so in the bathroom of the bank, he goes into the bank, he's got to get the money, doesn't have enough money, he's trying to figure out how to get out of it. You see the desperation on his face as he goes into the toilet and he's like, what do I do? How am I going to get out of this? He pulls a plunger apart to try to use it as a stick, try to hold it, and then he just gets rid of it. I think all that stuff is really, it adds to the sort of everyman suspense of this, in that you see the process as he's working it out. Unlike in a movie where I also love movies where the guy just does it perfectly, like the special ops movie where they just go in and they just kill everyone. There are no mistakes made. I love that too. But this movie really is highlighting his sort of ineffectiveness.
It reminds me, especially the scene we just said about the bank. I think one of the producers, I think it might have been it might have been Mario Casar when we did our Die Hard with a Vengeance episode. He said, all the Die Hard movies are a guy in a box, and the box can be a building or it can be an entire city, as it is in Die Hard with a Vengeance. But ultimately, it's still a guy in a box, and it's basically, and that's what this film I think has, especially in that scene, like at the bank, where it's like being backed and backed and backed into an increasingly tight corner, and using your wits and your and his courage as well, but his intellect to try and solve a seemingly insolvable problem, So I think that element is a good connection between the two films.
I like the idea of the box. So if you think about what's the box in this film, it's the desert.
Yes.
So he's stuck in the desert. And I like thinking of the desert. There's a sort of a bunch of sort of subgenre of movies of like people on the road getting harassed or whatever, right? And like, what's the like thing that they're stuck in is the fact that their car might break down, or your car might break down, and then you're at the mercy of just whatever happens to be out there. Hitchhikers, truckers, and you could kind of think of it a little bit like the trucker is like the shark patrolling the open waters. Like if you were to think of the water
absolutely.
as like where it's open, it's expansive. You're not like, it's not the same thing as being claustrophobic, being trapped in a single place. But it really is, because you can't, once you're there, like, and your boat runs out or your car gives out, you are stuck, and then you're just at the mercy of the elements and whatever nefarious creatures are nearby.
Yeah, that's a fantastic analogy. A really interesting way to look at it. It's all or space, as well to some extent, right? Like there's that. It's like the environment itself is a threat at a certain point, and then within that there are these other sort of forces that might be like predatory in some way or natural.
One thing I've been thinking about while you guys have been talking about this is that how this movie is like, if you were to take previous movies that we've talked about on the show and make this in a cocktail, it's like 2 parts Die Hard, 1 part The River Wild, and 1 part Nick of Time. Nick of Time having this sort of beta male that has to become an alpha male to like confront the villains. River Wild has this something similar in that it's this like East Coast person in a fish out of water kind of environment, and then combined with all the Die Hard, the Cracker Jack quality of Die Hard setting, it feels like
Massachusetts again in River Wild. So something about that seems to be some kind of shorthand for a certain level of like sophistication, I assume, right? Yeah, like intellectuals, like well-educated. Like the David Strathairn character, was he like an architect or something, right? And
he's an architect,
something like that. The sophisticated.
Do we know what Kurt Russell does in the movie? I can't remember.
Don't know if it's ever mentioned,
there's no
right?
details. I kind of love that.
They're moving to San Diego.
Everyman,
So
he's a guy who wears polo shirts.
I also think if you want to think of the two coasts of the U.S. as like the bastions of the liberal elite, and like where the quote unquote educated, wealthy, suburbanites kind of live. And then the middle of the country as what? It's just like this hellscape. It's like,
Yeah.
Everything else
and you
in the
have
middle.
to traverse
Fly
it, right?
over
You have to
states.
traverse it to get from one side to the other.
Well, let's dig into that in a bit more detail in our next section, Anatomy of an Action Movie, after this quick break.
College Savings Iowa is now iSave 529, and it can do more than take your child to college. It's their passport to a bright future, because funds can be used for K-12 tuition, trade schools, graduate degrees, books, and everything they need to get anywhere they want to go. Register by September 30th at iowa529contest.com for a chance to win a $5,290 contribution. iSave 529, for every child, for any adventure. College Savings Iowa is now iSave 529, and it can do more than take your child to college. It's their passport to a bright future, because funds can be used for K-12 tuition, trade schools, graduate degrees, books, and everything they need to get anywhere they want to go. Register by September 30th at iowa529contest.com for a chance to win a $5,290 contribution. iSave 529, for every child, for any adventure.
And we're back with our next section of the show, Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we explore the tenets. We live in a Twilight world.
And there are no friends that does.
Yeah!
I was thinking, I was like, can I say it backwards? No, I can't
No.
figure it out.
I don't know what it would be. That was my best
So
attempt.
I'm hearing on the grapevine that you're a tenet head, Justin.
Just a little bit. I was actually making a joke in a text thread earlier about Tenet. Anyway, I won't repeat the joke because it takes too long to set up. But yes, I'm constantly talking about Tenet in my actual
Never
life.
not talking about tennis.
I'm moving to Boston so we can hang out all the time. This
Are
seals
you
it.
into it as well, Laura, or no?
Do I love Tenet?
Yeah, she's been held hostage.
I love Tenet. There was no
Oh,
option
good.
for me to love Tenet, honestly,
Excellent.
in this home. But I do
Excellent.
legitimately.
You're kind of
I-
like the protagonist. You just had no choice. You just had to do
I had
it.
no choice.
Yeah.
No. The moment that we first watched it, and the phrase "temporal pincer movement," or the moment it first hit my ears, I was forever changed.
And everyone else
that.
is like, "What are you talking about,
And I
Christopher
was like,
Nolan?"
"Is this the coolest movie I've ever seen?"
It might be.
Hell yeah. Well, the
Time to
first
break
tenet of Anatomy of an Action Movie is the premise. And the premise of Breakdown is as follows. So, while taking a cross-country road trip to relocate, married couple Jeff and Amy Taylor, Kurt Russell and Kathleen Quinlan, experience car trouble and end up stranded in the middle of the desert. In an effort to reach a payphone, Amy accepts a ride from a seemingly friendly trucker named Red, played by JT Walsh. But when Jeff runs into the trucker again later, he claims to have never seen her. Jeff then begins to suspect that Amy has been kidnapped and that he may be in the middle of a sinister criminal plot. And the ticking clock is, can Jeff track down Amy before the trail goes cold and he loses her forever? Which is illustrated, I think, so wonderfully in the scene that you mentioned, Laura, about that. When once you see that board and you essentially see, oh wow, if this isn't solved pretty quickly, you will just become another face, anonymous face who disappears into that, that nightmare on of all these lost women on that board. So what I want to ask you guys, we touched on this a little bit, but what I'm really interested in, one of the reasons I was actually, beyond the fact that this is just an incredibly competently made thriller that perfectly encapsulates the sensibilities and the style of filmmaking at that time, what I'm really interested in asking you guys is, what's this film about? What's it trying to say? And what is it exploring about our collective fears? Particularly, I think, as it pertains to the uniquely American landscape that you're just sort of talking about. For me, coming from the UK, it isn't quite the same in the sense of like, you get lost on the motorway, you're not good, you might have to cross a farm or something, but if essentially there isn't that same fear factor that you have here. And I've experienced this myself, and like trips to Vegas or when you really see, like, if your car breaks down, you are in a world of trouble. So I'm really interested to kick it over to you guys about what's actually underneath this film.
So I have a lot about this, so please jump in at any point to build on what I'm saying or reject, object to it or whatever. But okay, so I think it's relevant that this film, you guys have been covering a lot of 90s films, so you know the period well, and we all lived in the 90s. But the 90s was a time of a lot of economic prosperity in the United States in particular. And I think one big aspect of the film that, I mean, again, a lot of 90s films are exploring, but I think this one in particular, and you guys mentioned this sort of yuppie and peril idea. And I think one of the things that this film is getting at is class anxiety around white suburban middle class of the 1990s. So in particular, I think you have this group of people mostly boomers and maybe their older Gen Xers, who are shifting out of the kind of blue-collar manufacturing jobs of their parents in the previous generation into white-collar work. So they're becoming, firmly middle class. They're working desk jobs. And there's at least two anxieties that I think this generation is facing. And then this is, I think, the intended audience of the film. So one is the natural anxiety of the newfound wealth that you have just being taken back by the very group that you have abandoned, that is rural, blue-collar, working poor. So one of the things we see in the film illustrating this is that the robbers, we see once they go to the barn, JT Walsh's barn, and we see like they've clearly been doing this for a long time. They've been robbing passersby, accumulating tons and tons of stuff, right? And I think that is, and it's the kind of stuff that, I mean, I grew up middle class, and like in the suburbs, the kind of stuff that I was very familiar with, cameras.
So many cameras and tripods.
Exactly. Yeah. Luggage and things, televisions, these sorts of things.
I like that that's like the signifier of like upper middle class is that you got like a lot of fancy camera gear. I mean, mostly, I'm sure they're like people who are often on vacation. Yeah, maybe that's why they got all their tripods and stuff. But I also like that they haven't been able to move that stuff. Yeah, so presumably, like, if anything of value that they could have sold, they would have sold. Like, but then they're just sitting on like a bunch of Nikons because they're like, I don't know.
So that's the first anxiety, which is a natural one. You've come into some money. Now, this film is interesting in that, of course, these guys are in a transition. The Kathleen Quinlan and Kurt Russell character are in a transition. They don't actually have that much money, but they are transitioning. I think of it as like they're sort of leaving that kind of rural stuff behind, and they're moving into whatever they as a group are moving into the sort of white collar work. Okay, but the second anxiety I think is maybe the more interesting one in the film, which is that it's the anxiety when you move into white collar work. What have you left behind? You've left behind using physical labor as your means for earning. So this is a compromise on your masculinity in particular. And I think over and over in the film, Kurt Russell's masculinity is called into question. So he's, for one, lost his wife, right? That's like the main thing that men are supposed to do by normal standards of masculinity. Protect your family, right? You have to be able to protect your family, protect your loved ones, and so on. Not just provide for them and also protect them. And he's unable to do that, at least in the beginning of the film. But then also when he's lost her, again and again, people ask him or sort of suggest that maybe she's just run off, right? They say like, oh, maybe she's just left you. Again, suggesting maybe his life now has become uninteresting, or he's become impotent as a result of his leaving behind his working class roots. And, even as a further element of this, at the bar, some barfly guy is just like, why don't you check the ladies' room? Right. Which is, again, emasculating, like, you as a man should just walk into the ladies' room because that's where, and you might find your masculinity there or something like that, because that's where you've checked it.
The other woman at the bar, who is later in that bathroom, calls him cowboy, facetiously though. And she says, maybe it looks like your wife got away from you, cowboy.
Yeah, I think it's very, I mean, there's the other thing about the Westerns. We can come back to the Western thing. I think it's also really interesting. But, and of course the film, though its audience is people who have this kind of anxiety. So the film has to, of course, have him succeed, and he has to succeed by defeating these kind of rural blue collar usurpers and sort of showing that his masculinity is intact. he's still got it, so to speak. Even though he has a whatever $30,000 Jeep Grand Cherokee or whatever he's driving, it's a fancy new car and all that. He hasn't lost the ability to get down and dirty with the blue collar work.
Well, this is a really fascinating interpretation. I want to sort of just put a pin in the masculinity aspect and circle back to it when we get to the hero session, because I want to dig in on that. But I actually want to dig a little deeper than the just the sense of where this film takes place in the zeitgeist and the socioeconomic factors that were going on at the time, which I think is really, really interesting. But I want to go just a couple of levels deeper than that, into almost the sense of like, and maybe this is something for me as an outsider, right, to America and to these kind of landscapes. So I've only lived here for 10, 11 years, but I think there's something deeply frightening about this space as portrayed in these films. This is part of the lineage of. There's a reason films like I think of films like Duel, right, and Deliverance, that are about what happens when you go from a place that is quote unquote civilized, as symbolized off screen by somewhere like Boston or a elite, sophisticated East or West Coast city. And what happens when you go through these parts of America that are not, in quotes, as civilized? That I think there's something much deeper going on. And I think with what you were saying earlier about the idea of Jaws is about Freudian fears of what's underneath the surface. And this idea of what if you go off the beaten track and suddenly you can't see there's no payphones, there's nothing, it's 100 degrees, 120 degrees. And what you have out there is a sort of lawlessness and just, maybe the perception is uneducated people, potentially deeply sinister people. This is a common theme in American cinema, right? Of what happens when the Deliverance being one of the classic paradigms of a group of they're yahoos, but they're relatively sophisticated guys from wherever they're from, Atlanta or something. I think they're from a city. They go to that and they realize this is the real America, right? In quotes. I'm just really interested in you guys as unpacking the deeper Jungian or Freudian collective fear that this is tapping into. But I think it's a uniquely American phenomenon to some extent, if any of that makes sense. I'd just love to throw some meat at you and see if you can chew on it a little bit.
So I am a product of white collar Massachusetts Irish Catholicism, right? So I would say my grandfather was a accountant, my father was a lawyer, and growing up on the East Coast and living there until my late 30s, it's probably important to note two things. One that's very specific about this movie, and another thing that's specific to the time. And the thing that's specific to this movie is, do you know where this movie was shot?
It looks like, I don't know, Arizona or
California.
Oh, is that right?
Wow.
Okay,
It was
yeah.
all shot in California. Also interesting to note that Kurt Russell was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, and moved to California at a young age, which I think will be interesting when we get into the Kurt Russell. But having moved here in my late 30s, having been an East Coast person in Boston and New York most of my life, and to move to LA and be I'm in the bastion of liberalism, and then to drive outside of LA and be in rural California, as an East Coast person, you're kind of where the fuck am I? Because it is so rural, and so it is the picture of what East Coast people think of as the kind of middle of the country, right? The flyover states,
untamed, unstructured landscapes.
And I think that a really interesting interpretation of this movie from maybe a Freudian or Jungian perspective is that maybe underneath Kurt Russell's kind of everyman trying to fit in is this deeply held resentment, because I think there's some of that in this movie. I think there's this sort of I'm from the East Coast. I'm an upwardly mobile middle class person, and I'm in the boonies, right? And those two will never meet, and that's obviously rooted in American history. The other thing is that I'm reading John Ganz's book When the Clock Broke, which essentially attempts to draw a line between the conservative movement now and the conservative movement in the early 90s, right? And, people like Pat Buchanan and Sam Francis, who is a white supremacist writer who imagined a pre-globalist America where individualism was the key, like underneath it is like pure, disgusting, unabated racism, right? But there's intellectual thinking about taking back the country, America first, all this stuff. And it's significant to me that this movie comes out when Bill Clinton is the president of the United States, and the Clintonian, Bill Clinton being this like, shucks, Arkansas kind of president, like, I'm rural poor, I know black people. Like, he really is the beginning of, not at the beginning, but certainly like an example of the kind of pushback that a conservative movement would have against kind of a liberal guy who's also kind of Southern and represents this kind of middle American value. I think there's like a confusion of the Bill Clinton identity, and there's animosity on him from both sides. And so the fact that there's like this, I think, a deeply held resentment at the core of this movie about East Coast, West Coast, and the middle of the country. And also, to come back to the California thing, the like middle of the country, at least on the West Coast, starts the second you leave LA. Like the second you're outside of LA, you're like, this is completely different. I'm not criticizing it. It's just, it's wild how different cities like Boston, New York, and LA feel from the rest of the country.
Yeah. I mean, to connect to some of the threads that we have going on here, I mean, when the individualism that is the sort of rugged individualism that goes with kind of rural expansionism or sort of American expansionism and that kind of thing, is that you're away from other people, right? You're away when you're expanding west, as this film is a Western in a way, because it's a man going west, out west, and he's sort of like he doesn't encounter. He encounters a native population in some sense,
right?
Which is, but in this case, this is the people who just happen to live there. But he's unfamiliar with that territory, and he's away. He's at sea in part because he's away from the things that he relies on as a city folk to get by, namely, infrastructure and that sort of thing. And he puts his trust and faith in the institutions, as one would, like the police and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But this is the Wild West. You can't put your faith in those institutions anymore. And so I think it's really, you're right, like that there's dimensions to which these sort of deeper anxieties about like being away from others that are like foundational or something to us. And of course, the desire to be away from others. But of course, that comes with a great anxiety. Like, you're on your own now.
Yeah.
Get translated in this film as I think as a kind of class anxiety, because it's the higher classes that have tended to be the ones which are more scaffolded to the community, whereas the lower classes are more like, well, I can fix a car, I can repair a toilet, I can do the things that are the basic functions that the rest of the society needs, and that you rely on as the people who are scaffolded above me. And I think it's telling too that one of the first encounters that Kurt Russell has with the villains is they're mocking his car. Mm-hmm. He's trying to repair the car. He's doing okay. He's putting oil in or whatever, whatever. But that it's the car that actually breaks down. Of course, they're the ones that do it. They sabotage the car, but it's his inability as a city folk who's not comfortable with that to fix the car on his own that leads to the very all of the problems. So I do think that so I think it's like both kind of simultaneously, because this is a film I think ultimately about that the fish out of water of being somebody who is reliant on others, of which I know very well. I'm very reliant on others. My car actually broke down when I was up in Dartmouth like a week ago, basically. And I had no idea what to do. I was and we were, Dartmouth is, it's still city. I mean, but like, we were like, when can a tow truck come? And it was 45 minutes, for a tow truck. And we were just like, we'll just walk, because at this point, it's not worth waiting for a tow truck at midnight. And
Oof,
but we couldn't fix it because I'm not was not familiar enough with the car. It turns out all I needed to do was jump it, and we were trying to jump it the wrong way. But like, anyway, just to say, like, I don't know what I'm. I have a lot of
lost skills
empathy.
for us because we don't need if they're not essential to you because you can call somebody. Exactly, they erode, right?
My dad had a 1985 Chevy. Sorry, I just have to tell this story, Phil, because I always have to talk about my dad. And he would change his own oil. He would just go out and change the oil, and he'd be under the car. And he's like, he got that car to run for 400,000 miles because he was so insane about it. The other day, I fixed like a short in the front of no, not the other day. Months ago, I figured out that there was something shorted in my car and I fixed it. And I've been living off the masculine fumes of that for 6 months. I'm like, I'm a real man.
Oh yeah, when I changed a broken tail light and just put the light bulb in, I felt like Tom Selleck. I could feel the mustache growing. I suddenly felt.
Do you want
like,
this shirt? This is a pretty good Tom Selleck shirt.
Just to wrap this up, and then I want to move into this on the section about Kurt Russell because where I feel like we cracked it there, Justin, because that was what I was trying to get to, and now it kind of has clicked in my mind. This all goes back to, and this is why it's a uniquely American story, the idea of the West. It hadn't quite clicked for me that this is sort of a westward bound, wagons west story. We're packing up our things and we're moving from the city to the new West, right? But on the way they encounter bandits, if you like, right? Yeah. Or as you say, the sort of native, in quotes, population that are dangerous and immoral and threatening to this white male character. It's just real that then, and then you throw in some of those maybe Freudian and Jungian fears about the unknown, wide open spaces, our need as a society, as a tribal species to have other people around us. And you take those things away and you turn up the heat literally. You've got a really great stew and great arena for a drama. So I feel like that's kind of clarified that. Let's move on then.
Laura,
and dig more.
Sorry,
go ahead, Laura. Yeah, please do. Sorry.
We just watched another movie that has. It feels like the exact same landscape, which is Thelma and Louise.
Yes.
But the iconography is totally flipped in that.
Right.
Because like just as we said, like he as a white male feels anxious about being away from society because it's a question of who society serves and who benefits from it. And for him, this wide open space and this disconnection is terrifying, like your net falling out from underneath you. And for those two women, it's like they're finally getting they're getting into open spaces away from the prison of patriarchal domesticity. And it's so liberating. It's using the same iconography, but it has like a completely different feel in that movie.
Yeah, I think it's to symbolize the freedom of it, right? Like, and also I think it's notable in that movie that it's Ridley Scott, a Brit, because we see this through a different lens. Yeah. We can see the telephone poles of Oklahoma as something incredible, instead of banal that it might be looked at by someone who's native to the country. We see that as like quite exotic and beautiful through if you have that the visual genius that someone like him does. But it's really interesting, how you can shoot the same things, but they can code them differently based on the context of the movie. So that's another really interesting point. Because it can be either like liberating or a terrifying threat, so it's got really interesting.
I think I should. It's fair to say that, like, I, as someone who grew up here with no, like, I'm not trying to say this negatively, but like, I do find open space terrifying because I grew up, not in Boston, but I was in cities enough, and I have lived in them since I was 22, to feel like when I go home to my mom's house and, the South Shore of Massachusetts, and I'm like laying in the bed and there's no sound, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it's a little weird to me, and it's where I grew up. And I still find it now like a little terrifying. There is that like pop cultural thing that Deliverance and The Hitcher and Duel in this movie kind of created, which is like the reciprocal nature of like, where the fuck am I? And what's going to happen?
And there's no rules, basically. There's no structure to things, and there's no help. So that creates a vacuum for,
totally
potential in our fears to emerge. And I think they're literalized in this film through the character of the villains. But before we move on to the villains, let's dig in a little bit more on our hero section. Kurt Russell as Jeff Taylor. As we talked about, this is Kurt Russell moving from Some of the, more iconic. I mean, 80s was an interesting era for him because he had a mixture of, I think, a lot of the John Carpenter collaborations, but he's often playing quite rough characters in those, whether it's Snake Plissken or his character in The Thing, MacReady, or Jack Burton, who, funnily enough, is a trucker, right?
The greatest. Big Trouble,
and Little China, and then a bunch of comedies and dramas and various other things. But this is an interesting one because it's the Kurt Russell yuppie era, which feels very 90s. Both the leads in this film are also an executive decision, where Kurt Russell plays an intellectual who also becomes more of an action hero. I'm just really interested in your thoughts on this. One thing here's what I want to say about this, right? We've used this terminology a lot, and I was thinking about this alpha male versus beta male, right? Which I think this film is absolutely about. But I hate this terminology because I feel like the idea has become a precept that we've all accepted, that being a beta male sounds as if you're somehow lesser. Because what it means to me is, do you mean you're not an aggressive arsehole who's like trying to bully people and intimidate them? And and we're supposed to accept the idea societally that that's bad and that you're a step down from the alpha males who do MMA and can beat you up, but
like me.
It's like, but that, like Liam, who's constantly bullying me and threatening me with showing me his big muscles all the time, and it makes me feel insecure. Right?
I don't know. Do you know another Liam?
The point is, but this is tapping into these insecurities that exist between the physical skills that in some cases are still absolutely necessary, especially in an environment like that, being able to fix a car, whatever it might be, versus the more civilized. It also almost reminds me of Heart of Darkness, some of this stuff as well, right? A savage, untamed landscape versus the perceived, intellectual people that then go into that world and have their ideas about the world challenged in some way. You know what I mean? But anyway, I just think that's really, really interesting. This film is clearly exploring that idea of that male insecurity about whether alphas feel insecure because they don't have the money or the Ralph Lauren polo shirt or the Benetton sweater for the wife, all of that. So the materialism that's referenced in the film and the fancy car, they feel insecure about that. So it's manifested through intimidation and violence because they have that advantage. So I think the tension between these two perceived forms of masculinity is kind of at the core of this movie. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on this character, Kurt Russell, what it's conveying to you, etc.
I just wanted to thank you for confirming it. He was saying Benetton. He was
Yes.
He was saying it funny, right? He's like Benetton.
The
and that's
Benetton
why
sweater, yeah. that he
Benetton sweater,
references.
and the joke is that the bartender says interprets it as button
Buttoned
down.
up, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Right, because again, like,
Not a
what
bad
kind of dude knows what brand is? And that's also very unhelpful. If I was like, she's wearing a Calvin Klein top, like,
Completely unhelpful.
how would you? What does that
it's
mean?
pretty rubbish description.
But it's like weird because like I don't know, like
Apparently
does
it's
this movie
important to this
fucking
character.
hate everybody? Because like no dude would go into a bar and be like Benetton, and then like the flip side is no bartender or whatever manager of a diner is going to say button down. Like it's so contrived that like when I was watching this, I felt like this movie is deeply antagonistic towards the middle of the country, but it's also kind of antagonistic towards Kurt Russell. And I'm just curious, like, does Jonathan Mostow, is he like a nihilist? Does he hate everybody? Like, what's his? It's just I don't know.
I think there's equal maybe blame on both sides, at least, if maybe he doesn't hate everybody. But I like that moment too where he says like, oh, the donuts are probably gourmet and for for this part of the country. I was like, oh, that is really rude.
Well, there's a certain elitism, and I think it's important that the characters have that elitism because it's it shows that they are truly not in their element. I have a question for you guys about Kurt Russell because I think he's too old for this role. I love him in this movie. I mean, I've known him. This is the movie that I knew Kurt Russell from. Again, I watched this tons when I was a kid. But he's 46 when this movie is made.
Huh.
And the characters seem like they should be in their 20s, late 20s.
Or like 34.
Or early 30s.
Not to make any assumptions about everybody's circumstances, but they don't have children, right?
They don't have children.
Seemingly.
They got $5,000 in the bank.
They don't have very much money. There's like a big career shift that's happening. It really feels like they should be younger. Now, here's just to give you a sense of where you could have gone with this. I think it's, first of all, no shade on Kurt Russell. I think he's amazing. But suppose this had been Ryan Felipe, or suppose this had been, or even Leonardo DiCaprio, someone who could play like a kind of entitled brat who has to be schooled by someone like JT Walsh and then like comes around again. It changes the dynamic I think in an interesting way,
Your
because
relationships would be different.
Kurt Russell and JT Walsh are not that far apart in age. So it's a little bit, you would combine the class stuff with a generational divide, which I think would actually make the film like it would deepen those themes in an interesting way.
It would,
and especially if the kid's like a snot.
The thing about Kurt Russell is that he actually appeals to everyone, no matter where you are on the, I think, political or socio-economic. Yes, he because we all want to be Kurt Russell to some extent, like on some level as guys, because he's cool, he's competent. He can be vulnerable, and he's never like, that the bad side of the alpha, but he is someone that we aspire to be. And I think that's what movies do. Whereas I think the version you're talking about would be like a class critique that is much more in line with your classic yuppie in peril, Pacific Heights type. Matthew Modine, right, plays, and Melanie Griffith, I think, right, are yuppies who buy property in San Francisco, and they're. I mean, it's interesting because Kurt Russell also played Unlawful Entry. Kurt Russell was in that as a sort of, again in quotes, beta male who's confronted by the alpha in Ray Liotta, right? So I think you're right. It's a very different kind of movie, and I think it would be a smaller movie with a limited appeal, but might have more, it would allow them to dig in more into those themes. But I think this is aiming for like broad appeal. It's a Paramount, I think that's right. Movie, right? You need a big star that everybody likes.
Totally. The character would be less likable.
Yes,
I think that would make
you said Ryan Felipe. I was like, you kind of want him to like get
Blues.
his.
I think it would be actually a little bit more interesting if he was a little bit less likable. And you add some empathy for these, because you do get a little bit of empathy for JT Walsh when he goes home, he's got a family and kids, and then you have a kind of very small home invasion film when Kurt Russell goes in there with the gun and he's holding them up. I mean, I actually think like...
And the kid's crying.
And the kid is crying. Like, you would be playing with the audience's expectations and sympathies in ways that I think would deepen it. Granted, I love this film. I'm not in no notes, but I'm just saying.
One thing just on this, and then we can move on unless sorry, it looks like you were going to make a point, Liam. One thing I think is really interesting about that is that Kurt Russell himself said he thinks this is one of the most obnoxious characters he's ever played.
Totally.
That doesn't come across, though.
Yeah,
that doesn't,
so
because
charismatic.
He is so charming and likable and relatable.
What's smart about it is that you can feel his desire to not be talking to. Like, he is the critique of the East Coast elite, because he is like, yeah, my car broke down, but he's like seething with like frustration at the people around him because he thinks they're fucking idiots, right?
Yes.
Like, as a side note, I think one of the interesting things about the choice to cast and the way the cast is made up of this movie is Kurt Russell. We talked about this on our Turbulence episode when we talked about Ray Liotta as one of the great last white ethnic actors. Kurt Russell comes off as this like everyman white guy, like, like sort of like Scandinavian kind of quality. You don't feel his like ethnicity, and that's also true of someone like JT Walsh. So it's sort of interesting that like they're just white guys. Yeah, like they're not white Irish or Italian. They don't have the like that kind of thing that often is characterized of these kinds of actors, and it's very, very interesting to me. Side thing, and then we can move on. You know who would be great in this part and make it extremely dark? Would be, at the time, 33-year-old Matt Dillon. Can you imagine Matt Dillon in this part? Just like full of frustration at this like sort of middle American. It just would be very interesting.
He comes across as quite alpha to me, though. Matt Dillon, he could be though. But he could play a softer version of himself, and that would come out. Let's talk about my interpretation of his age in this. I think is that like I kind of think of this character of Kurt Russell's character as just like a huge fuck up. And he's having to dig deep. Like maybe this is like me attempting to like infuse a little bit. We can talk about this when we get to the lady, but like infuse a little bit more personality or backstory or something into like the victim wife. But I kind of get the feeling that he is the reason that they're like crossing the country, have no finance. She's like, our finances are pretty fucked. He got a $30,000 car when they have $5,000 in the bank. I'm kind of like,
this seems like it's on you.
Yeah.
And she's not mean about it. She's very supportive. She's going to do the thing with him, but I feel like it's not her fault. You know what I mean? I feel like he's a doofus.
Which is
Laura's
very
speaking from
diehard, by the way.
experience here.
Right.
A lot of experience
Right, yeah, yeah.
being married to a doofus.
You know, like,
You
and
know,
like,
the
and
idea of the you know, Bonnie Bedelia's character Holly in Die Hard is doing better. John McClane is kind of a fuck up,
Yeah.
right?
And he's gotta, like,
certainly in
redeem
his
himself.
marriage, you know. So that is really interesting. But hold that
I think their
thought
marriage
and
is better
we'll-
than the one in
Yes,
Die
they
Hard.
have
But
a
she's
healthier
supporting him, but
marriage.
she's like,
I mean, Kurt Russell's
You fucked
hot
up.
also. Let's be real. Kurt Russell's like a babe. Not that Bruce
yeah,
Willis is
no,
sorry.
you
nice
hold on
looking,
to that.
they're
No
a nice
matter
looking
how much
couple.
big of a doofus, you hold on to those
Look at
eyes.
that hair. Good
I know.
Lord.
Let's move on to our section on the villain because I have a lot to say
Oh,
about
boy.
this,
Yes.
and I know we don't
Yeah.
we don't. I don't want to take up
Clear
all
the
your time.
runway for
Okay.
Phil.
All right, let's hear
All right,
it.
if I-
Preach.
Okay, so JT Walsh as Warren Red Barr. I've got a few things I just want to sort of talk about with this, and I'm curious if this is relatable or not. But I'm going to say it's a little bit personal. I really, really love this actor, and I was when we were doing this episode, I was trying to sort of process why is it that I feel this intense, intense feelings about him. I think it's also partly because he died so young, but. So when I was one of the first thing I ever did is I've dabbled in acting. I'm not an actor. I'm a writer, but I as probably many of us have dabbled in it when in my youth. And the first thing I ever did was a production of David Mamet's Glengarry Glen Ross, playing the role of John Williamson, right? Who is the sort of malcontent office manager who is a bit of a self-server and is kind
Who
of...
is that in the movie?
In the movie, it's Kevin Spacey.
It's Kevin
who plays that
Spacey,
part.
okay.
Okay. Now, that role was originated by JT Walsh in the original Chicago production and then subsequently on Broadway. And I also wrote about this as part of my dissertation. My dissertation was about American business movies and what were they landed on their like political spectrum, as whether they were pro or anti-capitalist, so Wall Street, Working Girl, Company of Men, things like that. So I did a deep dive on Glengarry as part of that conversation. What's it saying about capitalism? Anyway, JT Walsh was on the cover of this magazine, of this book that I was reading. It was like an academic book as the Williamson character. And I've always had this thing, and I don't know if you can relate to this at all, but it's like I feel like if you've played a part in the history of like theater, whether it's in front of 3 people in a furniture store or on Broadway, there's some kind of cosmic connection you feel to the actor because they've played the same part, especially if it's a somewhat of an obscure part like that. It's not Romeo or Hamlet or necessarily, although that has the same validity, if not more, perhaps. But for me, so I always had this sense of like this weird thing where I like we have some distant weird connection because we've done the work of playing this part. But this part is like that part, particularly John Williamson, is like almost the perfect example of the kind of parts that he excelled at. Because my theory about JT Walsh is that he made manifest America's id on screen. If you look at his body of work, he always played these characters that were like amoral and avaricious and self-serving and ruthless, but ultimately cowardly. When they were backed into a corner, like you see it a lot, like, when often JT Walsh will he'll be like really, really powerful, but then when he's stripped of the power and the power is revealed to be illusory. Executive Decision is a good example of this. I think he's a senator. Narrow Margin is a slightly more sympathetic character, but he eventually realizes he's a corrupt mob lawyer or accountant or something, right? And then he
I think
gets
it's an
caught
accountant, but
by
yes.
the gangster. He's been embezzling money, and then he just goes to pieces and it is like humiliated. These are the kind of parts that he would play a lot, whether they're businessmen, crooked cops, a guy trying to kill his wife in Red Rock West. He symbolized like the moral rot at the heart of America, but it was always in this very casual, normal way. It was never like mustache twirly. And he's also very interesting. Another thing that I realized about him that was another sort of unconscious and tangential connection. He was born in San Francisco, but he grew up in West Germany, where his father was stationed. He spoke fluent fluent German, and my grandmother was German, so I have some German connection. What I also love about him was that his who he was as a person is in total contrast to the characters that he excelled in playing. He led a life of social activism. He was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer.
Big Democrat.
He protested the Vietnam War. Yeah, and he had a bunch of other jobs before he became an actor. And we talked about this a lot, Liam, about how the value of people that didn't just come out of some come out of a cocoon polished and ready to star in movies, right? Like a lot of the actors we see now. He was a barman, encyclopedia salesman, high school teacher, gym equipment salesman, a reporter. And the last thing, just on this is like Kurt Russell said about him, and they've been in, I think, 4 films together. The other 2 were Backdraft and Tequila Sunrise, in which he plays
a great working class movie.
Yeah, great. Both fantastic movies. And they have a lot of great scenes together. JT Walsh described him as flawless. So there's nothing phony about him. There's nothing fake about him. And, Jack Nicholson dedicated his As Good As His Gets Oscar to him, amongst several other people, it should be said. But the point is, that's game recognizing game, right? This is a guy that can go toe to toe with the best in the business, big movie star. And he was such a heavyweight actor. So I deeply love him. And I think this is really this is his biggest ever role, I think, as the lead villain. Usually he's a memorable part of an ensemble, but this is his biggest ever, it's him v. Kurt Russell as the lead villain. And I just think he is amazing in this. He is so, so great. So anyway, I just sort of wanted to, especially if an actor, we've lost them and so early in his life, it's just nice to be able to talk about him and beyond who he was on screen as well. And some of the other wonderful things that it seemed like he did in his own life. So yeah, your thoughts on him, his performance, your favorite JT Walsh performances, and just what he might mean to you, and where you kind of intersect with this kind of low-key American icon,
Yeah, there are many that I haven't seen, but this is my favorite. And in part, I think he was a very selfless actor in the sense that he was willing to just disappear into these roles, play roles that were sort of most of the paying audience wasn't going to remember, but do them selflessly and do them well, and then for the people who do care, like yourself, and are paying attention, just really marvel at. And I think that is the definition of a great character actor, and I think he was an incredible one. I think this movie in particular, this is not like stunt casting in the sense that this guy isn't like a truck driver or whatever, but you could have fooled me. If you had told me in 1997 or 8 when I first watched this movie, yeah, that guy was just an actual truck driver, I'd be like, yep, that seems right. He seems
totally
like exactly that guy.
Yeah.
He looks and sounds exactly the part. And I think that's really incredible.
Yeah. He reminds me of Philip Seymour Hoffman's, maybe in the physicality, or he's the mercurialness. When he shows up, when he comes back, when you see him again and he's like, I've never seen you before. And he's so believable. He's not twirling his mustache, as you said, Phil. He does. I totally believe that could, it almost took me a second where I was like,
you actually start to doubt yourself. He's that good.
I'm like, maybe Kurt Russell's wrong. Or are there twin truck drivers? He's so, he's so compelling and believable. He's not menacing throughout this whole movie. He's very able to switch it on a dime. But then when he's menacing, he's very menacing.
You know who else was born in West Germany because his father was in the military? Bruce Willis.
Oh.
Which is an interesting note. But yeah, I think that the only thing I'll say, and then we can wrap it up, is that I think that this is a guy who can do nothing on camera and be absolutely unbelievably compelling.
Yes.
And that is an underrated quality. And yeah, I totally agree. And I know what you mean about actors who've played a part. You know the British actor Stephen McIntosh?
Yes, yeah.
He played
was
Sebastian.
in my film.
Really?
Yeah, he was in Modern Life is Rubbish.
I have that with him because he played Sebastian in Twelfth Night, which was the first Shakespeare I did in college. So I totally understand that affinity.
I wasn't sure if I was out on a limb on that. I had something similar with Michael Maloney, who played Rodrigo in the film version of Othello.
Gosh,
and
should we
I
all
played
do
that
Shakespeare
part.
together? Let's do a play. Let's go. Let's do it. I actually want to. I'm trying to talk Phil into it.
Just a couple of seek out some of JT Walsh's other amazing parts where he's actually a slightly more sympathetic character, which are different. One of which is his uncredited cameo in Outbreak, which I believe could actually be an actor's monologue for auditions, because it's basically him just doing a 5-minute monologue about the moral complexity of the situation that they're in with the outbreak of the virus, and he's a more sympathetic part in that. And also he plays Ehrlichman quite sympathetically, surprisingly, in Oliver Stone's Nixon, which is a very human, tragic character. Let's move on and let's talk about the lady. We touched on it a little bit, but Kathleen Quinlan as Amy Taylor, great actress, great performance, great career. Apollo 13 being a career highlight. I think she got a nomination for Oscar nomination.
She's great in that movie.
I really like the ease, to your point, Laura, of the early scenes that they have together, where unlike some of the other Die Hard on a Blank films we've discussed, they clearly seem to have, even though there's obviously some dysfunction there, it's a good marriage, it's a good relationship. They're not emotionally estranged like in Die Hard or The River Wild, where the husband and wife are, or True Lies as well, actually, at the beginning of the film. Just interested in you guys' thoughts on how she fits in as an actor and as a character into this
She
this
seems
piece.
smart. I mean, for the most part, she's not in this movie, and she's in some various forms of boxes off screen, so we don't really see what her experience is. But here's what we do know: she thought quick. She was like, "My husband's a donut king, and we have 90,000 in the bank, right?" And she's keeping them both alive, and she telegraphed they have that strong
Brilliant
connection.
writing that.
Yeah, it's great writing. They make sure you get it because you see the donut traveling down the hill, traveling down the river a few times. But when he has to come up with the number in his bank account and it has to match hers, that was some quick thinking, lady. She's smart. She's keeping it all together. She's holding it down in her various boxes.
Wow. Oh, yeah, I like the idea that they make a version of this from her perspective, and it's just called Various Boxes, and it stars Kathleen Quinlan.
Buried with Kathleen
Quinlan.
Quinlan.
Right. Man in a box. This is woman in a box off screen for the whole
totally.
bunch.
Be kind of an art film. Be special.
Yeah, I think she's great in it, and it's important that she makes such a good impression as a character, so believable, so likable, so smart, and in the short amount of time that she has before she's whisked away, and then ultimately it's her that gets the last word, because it's her that actually pulls the thing to end the nightmare and give JT Walsh's comeuppance.
Certainly not a damsel in distress, which is the best thing you can give someone who only really has about 15 minutes of screen time.
But at the same time,
movie.
She's not Ellen Ripley, right? It's a very believable. She's not like some gung-ho action heroine, right? It's just very, very believable. She is victimized, but she doesn't come across as a victim, I think. And she's really great in it. The action in this film, just very briefly, it does go into fifth gear, as it were, it goes from a quite realistic thriller into kind of a crazy, Hal Needham movie for the last 10, 15 minutes with some of those stunts. But I think it's brilliantly done. It is a slight tonal,
My wife checked out. She was like, this has gone too far.
It's gone, it does get a little, it becomes a bit of a different movie. It gets a little big, but it's solid, muscular, practically shot. That may or may, I can see why some people might kind of disengage.
Phil, who shot this? Do you know?
I'd have to pull it up.
Sorry,
I don't have the info at the fingertips. Usually I do.
Just curious.
Out of Act 1, 2, or 3, Jess, what was your favorite?
That's a good question. I like the bank sequence a lot. I think that's really fun.
Me too. That's also my favorite. It's smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
Because we had to pause there for because you had described the first the parts based on how much Jeff knows, right?
Yeah, you could think of the movie as this is just, if you want to think of it as a screenwriting 101 type thing. It's structured in by how the relationship between what Jeff knows versus what the villains knows. So he starts out knowing less. Then in the middle, they know the same, and he's able to sort of get one out on them. And then in the end, the roles have been completely reversed, and he knows more than them because he's now spying on them. So it's just a nice, very straightforward 3-act structured around the kind of relative knowledge.
And great dramatic irony. Go ahead.
Yeah. what I like too about that middle section is because Billy plants it in our minds that like maybe the police are in on it. We don't know, and Jeff doesn't know in the middle. He knows about as much as the villains do in terms of like what their plot is and what their goals are, but he doesn't know who's involved and who's not involved. And neither do we at that point. And so that's, I think, what like I really ratchets that tension up in the bank.
Yeah, we don't know who. You don't even know if the bank guy's in on it.
Right.
Even,
yeah,
or,
and the guy who comes in like for a loan and
paranoid thriller
in the eyes.
Yeah,
totally. I
totally.
love a paranoid 70s thriller. So I was like very into
has
that
some
part.
of that vibe.
Are you a Nick of Time fan, Laura?
I have not seen Nick of Time.
I love.
You
Nick
guys
of
should
Time.
watch it because it's like an interesting sort of like amalgamation of various 70s thriller with like a young, handsome, different Johnny Depp. Let's just put it that way. It's just a different
playing
take on the Johnny Depp
Christopher
experience.
Walken.
Yeah.
Walken is amazing in it.
Yeah.
I'm in. I
the
am.
DP,
Anytime
by
I get
the
to be
way,
like, does it go all the way to the top? I'm in.
Wait, no, Phil, save it. I want to make it a bonus trivia question.
All right, cool. Well, let's move on to our section of the show called the Die Hard Oscars, where we give
Did you guys
out
put your
our
tuxes? Did you
action
bring? No, you
movie
got your
awards.
Cows in the Field T-shirts.
You've got your
Ripping.
Benetton
We got the shirts.
sweaters.
We need shirts.
Put your
now.
Benetton sweaters on.
Yeah, we got my Benetton.
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 Button down. I'm wearing a button up. Actually, let me button the top. I don't want to get anyone too
Go
excited.
all the way.
You know,
Goes all
All
the way.
right.
very.
top.
Yeah, let me just.
buttons.
This is great video content. I love that we did this. My buttons.
Our first award is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line. And I didn't have too many. One that I think, speaks to some of the things we talked about earlier is Earl saying, "You got to be the dumbest motherfucker yet. You think we just picked you out of the clear blue, shiny new car, Massachusetts plates. It'll be a week before anyone even misses you. Should have got that bumper sticker that goes with that car. Rich assholes looking for trouble." Kind of encapsulates what we were talking about, I think, quite
They're not
well.
even rich.
You know,
Sorry,
they're not rich.
I know, but they have
comparatively, or they're perceived
They have
as.
a car.
It's the perception of that's really fascinating. Everyone's
They're
wrong
actually
in
in
this movie.
debt and
Right.
in financial trouble, right? It's just they have the veneer of it. What's that? You want me to stop? You really want me to stop? Because I'll bet this baby stops on a fucking dime. That scene with the seatbelt was like,
Watched that
wow,
twice. I
that
watched
was
that
so
twice.
good. But the line that I remember from this movie from 20 odd years ago was, "Don't mister me, you son of a bitch." You remember when he says that? Like,
Who says that?
Because when he turns up at JT Walsh's house and he's basically got him banged to rights, and JT Walsh is like, "Mister, I don't know who," he's still trying to convey that, like, I don't, in front of his wife and kid, I think, at that point. And he says, "Don't mister me, you son of a bitch." I remembered that line. So those were the three that I picked. I don't know if you have a choice or an additional nominee of a line that
I
you
have
liked.
one more to add to the
Please.
nominee, which is Billy. He says, "Well, now you're the dummy. Well, now don't you get it? The police are the ones in on it." I like that line. Because
think that
it's
was in the
so
trailer.
like it's one of those things where they're like, "Oh fuck."
Dun, dun, dun.
Paranoid.
Yeah.
Shades of Deliverance and Billy sort of pretending to be like, I don't know what the term, like kind of like
Yeah.
learning disabled or something would be the,
He's like
the term that
this-
it would be used.
Yeah. I think he's just maybe simple.
Well, it's playing with the stereotype of, uneducated rural poor, right?
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And subverting it in an interesting
I
way.
liked the bartender didn't see her. Jeff, you didn't see her or she didn't come in? Bartender,
right.
Like I told you last time, maybe she was in, maybe she wasn't. All I'm saying is I didn't see her.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's a good. That
guy.
might be it. That
So
or the
frustrating.
The stop line. Yeah. Oh man.
And yeah, and if anybody's just had like a bad customer service experience where you're like, please care. And they're like, we don't care. But also it's so sinister.
Diners in the middle of the country are a little scary. I'm going to be honest. Again, it's
Another
all
trope
perception.
of this genre,
They probably shot that like in Burbank, though. To be real, like they probably shot it like down the street. That's the hilarious part.
I will say that the people in that diner suck. They're horrible. They're all horrible people,
Yeah.
And some of them may come up in a second. The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. Now, this was a little bit tricky, but I basically said if Kurt Russell's the star, anyone else can be nominated, including.
Well, I think
of
we know
course,
who wins then.
Yes, probably. All right, so we've got Kathleen Quinlan as Amy, Rex Lynn, Die Hard on a Blank returning all-star as Sheriff
Cliffhanger.
Boyd, and JT Walsh as Warren Red Barr. It would, of course, be my choice, as great as the other two are.
Yeah, I
Do you have
mean,
a pick?
yeah, JT for sure. But
JT.
I also, I mean, I actually do think the guy who plays the bartender is really good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's going to come up in a
Jackie.
second.
Just yeah, that guy is yeah. That was a very every scene that guy's in, I think, is incredible. He also just feels like they just went to some place in whatever Hatchet or wherever they are. What is the name of Bailey's? What's this bar? Or
Bell's.
Bell's
Diner.
Yeah.
Who's Belle? Not him.
She's also a missing person. Dark. Yeah. I'm
Oh,
gonna
wow.
just to provide the contrast, I'm going to go with Rex Linn, just because I love Rex Linn and he's such a sturdy presence in these movies, and I think he's actually low key incredible in Cliffhanger because you don't know what to think of the guy the entire time.
Oh,
It's
I
just
love
a really
him
good
in that.
performance.
Yeah, he gets to flex his acting chops a bit more than usual than just playing a sort of hard ass in that.
Yeah.
He is great in it. But for me, I'm going to give it to JT. The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie.
Kurt Russell.
Quite a lot of nominees. Yeah, potentially turn this thing on its head.
Everybody.
MC
be honest.
Gainey as Earl. Not the nicest man. Jack Noseworthy as Billy. The aforementioned obtuse bartender, who's played by Jack McGee, who ends up pulling a gun on Kurt Russell. I think went a little far there, where he's like, I want to look at the order slips. He's like, pulls a gun on him.
But that's the East Coast fear of the middle
Yes.
of America. They all have guns.
And the guy at the bar who tells Kurt Russell to look in the ladies' room where the
That was a dick
patron
move.
is throwing
That was
up,
so
right?
rude.
Yeah, that guy was amazing.
Thoughts?
Yeah.
Dick of the movie?
I just want to give like Billy something.
You're giving it to Billy?
Yeah. For the sort of silly transformation, then he pulls off his baseball hat and you're like, that man has so much hair. That hair was underneath that baseball hat the whole time.
It's a good choice.
I also by the way, that actor, Jack Noseworthy, born and raised in Boston and went to has a BFA, in a
It's always
conservancy. So he is
Wow.
kind of you know what I mean? And his sort of he's doing a little bit too much in his first iteration of the role, and then he pulls off the hat. He feels a little bit theater-y in a fun way.
Yeah, I did like him.
All right. Our final category. I don't know if you're ready for this, Liam.
I'm sorry. I just started reading Jack Noseworthy's Wikipedia entry, and I'm very fascinated. So come back to me in 2 minutes. No, I'm just kidding.
Pause on that, because some of that might come up in the trivia section.
Oh,
But our last Oscar is the best death. I don't know. Do you want to try and do Marco as JT Walsh?
Terrible! Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate. That was my my JT Walsh at the end there. Just a pivot.
underplay. Yeah.
God, I'm so obnoxious.
Just imagine him saying that JT Walsh would just be like, how would you?
Yeah, it'd be incredible. Don't even try it.
I want to do it.
It would be amazing.
I want to channel JT so we have our cosmic connection could be completed. We've got an injured Rex Linn shooting MC Gainey from behind. That was cool. That bit, that was a great sequence of surprise and suspense where the sheriff is shot and then he gets Earl.
We're gonna have an MC Gainey month because he's on the next movie. In the next movie we're talking about too, Con Air, the greatest movie of the 1990s.
I'll scrap that question off the trivia quiz. Luckily, I have a backup. So we've got that. We've got Kurt Russell ramming Jack Noseworthy's red Firebird until it flips over and explodes. Literally, get the Firebird, yeah.
Wait,
and
what?
JT Walsh's truck falling on top of him, as if he didn't have it wasn't bad enough that he fell from that bridge. He had to have the 18-wheeler land on him.
That's horror movie rules.
Yeah,
you got to make sure they are
he's still moving.
dead.
They look
he's
down,
still
they
moving.
see him still moving, and they look at each other, and then hard cut, she's like...
She pulls it, because she's not Laurie Strode in first Halloween. She's like, this is not... Knitting needle's not going to do it. We need to smush
She's seen
this
enough
guy.
movies to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a badass final girl.
That has to be the winner, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
It's pretty death. Pretty great death.
Pretty great.
That does it for the Oscars. We have one more section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz, where the scores can really change, and we will do that after this quick break. And we're back with our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz. So you guys are now, collaboration is mandatory. So there's no competition. Everyone can relax. You can just work together. We got a firework.
I just made...
Wow! A firework.
I gave a thumbs up. And there it goes.
Wow.
This is crazy. People are
Justin, you gotta
people
look at
love
your,
the trivia
You're gonna
quiz.
get eaten alive if you're teaching on Zoom.
Wow.
So you gotta figure that
I gotta
out, man.
stop this.
Okay, so you get one clue. You can work together and you can discuss it to crack these. Question number 1. This is why I just wanted to stop you. Breakdown cast members Kathleen Quinlan and Jack Noseworthy also appeared together in which intense and gory 1997 sci-fi horror movie?
I think I know this because I looked up her filmography.
Okay.
But Liam, I think you also know it.
I do.
Yes. Okay. It's Event Horizon.
Is the correct answer.
Wild
Is it
fucking movie.
Die Hard on
Yeah.
a haunted spaceship?
Are we doing it?
Are you guys doing
I
it?
don't
Yeah.
think so. I mean, if
It's not
there's
quite the same
Nah,
thing where
it's-
there's a
nah.
single guy, against.
bad guys take over a blank,
Yeah.
kinda. You could make the case, but I don't think we'll do it on.
Would it be Die Hard in a portal to hell or something?
Good movie,
Yeah.
though. I have to say.
Great
I'm a
movie,
fan.
and they have a kind of cool relationship in that's very like maternal, which is interesting, completely different to their dynamic in this one. I have to pull out my backup piece because my MC Gainey one came up. That happens. That's why I have a backup. Question number 2. This is a toughie. Breakdown Helmer Jonathan Mostow would go on to direct Bruce Willis in which little seen 2009 sci-fi movie?
I know. Do you guys know?
I do not know this.
Surrogates.
Is correct. I like that movie.
You're
I thought
the
it was
one.
cool. I liked
Is it good?
I thought it was cool.
I haven't seen it since it came out. I remember not loving it, but again, it's 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, this is an interesting one. For our final quiz question from Convoluted Corner.
I hate that.
Question
bit.
number 3. Prolific character actor Jack McGee plays the unhelpful barman in Breakdown, one of an astonishing 224 acting credits.
Name them all.
we'll take as long as it takes.
Your heart
No
out
looking at
is
your phones.
over.
In which iconic action movie franchise does McGee appear in the role of a carpenter in 2 different sequels?
Oh God.
A carpenter?
I can hear some clicking, Liam.
Yeah, because I need to look at a picture of Jack McGee. I'm not going to look at his credits. I promise. I just
Okay.
need to see
Okay,
his
yeah,
photo.
I
All
like
I'm gonna
closed
say
my
is-
laptop because I was like,
No,
I'm
yeah, I'm
not
not
This won't
cheating.
count as a clue, but Liam, you
Okay.
should know this. And you'll kick
Is-
yourself if you don't. Get it.
Liam,
Sequels.
if you don't have it, I will be open to a clue because I'm not.
Yeah, no, go for
there's
the
no
clue.
way
Go
I'm
for
gonna
the
go
clue.
with this.
We're going to
God
phone a
damn it.
friend. We're going to radio our power. The clue is this series of 4 action films were all produced by Joel Silver, and all 4 were directed by Richard Donner.
He's just walking
God
away.
damn it.
Oh, Liam got
You
it.
remember
Okay,
now?
I don't know.
It's Lethal Weapon.
Is
Of
correct.
course he's the carpenter. And so the thing is, in my head, I'm like, it's this guy. Yeah, he's the nail gun guy in Lethal Weapon 2.
Because Danny Glover's house is always getting destroyed, and this guy always comes in and fixes it. So it's kind of a funny in-joke.
He's in 2 and 3, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Ugh, let's go watch
So-
Lethal Weapon right after. I'm going to go watch all 4 of
Sadly,
them.
I've not seen any of the Lethal Weapon sequels.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
They're
Oh.
all good. It's amazing.
Okay.
They're all good. Even 4, Phil. I don't care what you think. I love 4.
I love 4. I love
good.
them all.
Okay, good.
3's
good.
my favorite.
That's crazy.
That about does it, as I now
Wait,
seem to start
very
saying.
quickly. Here's a fun trivia question we'll just throw there. The DP on this movie, Douglas Milsom, was the camera operator on 3 films made by one of the great auteurs of the 20th century, and then was the DP on one of his last movies. Can you guess who the director was? There's a clue available.
I actually know this because I just looked it up, so I won't say.
Wait, so one of the
Douglas
great
Milsom
directors
shot this movie. He was
Yeah.
camera operator on 3 films made
Camera
by an
operator.
American director who mostly worked in the UK.
It's sounding Kubrickian to me, but
Do you want to?
is it Kubrick?
It's Stanley
Bill's-
Kubrick.
yeah, okay,
That's
okay,
correct.
Wow.
So he was the camera operator on Clockwork Orange. Barry Lyndon, who's one of the
Wow.
great looking movies ever made, and The
And Eyes
Shining.
Wide Shut?
And he DP'd Full Metal Jacket.
Okay.
He did not do Eyes Wide Shut. It looks like he was busy with the Dracula sequels at that time. He also shot Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which is a beautiful looking movie. So very talented.
Very
DP.
cool.
And he was the camera operator on Last of the Mohicans. So this guy
Wow.
is legit.
Pretty
Yeah.
impressive.
Legit.
Pretty impressive.
Wow.
Pedigree. Thank you guys so much for being here. Tell us what's coming up on Cows in the Field and what you guys have going on.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having us. We love the show, and
So fun.
and we love talking with you guys. We've had both Phil and Liam on Cows in the Field. We've talked about Public Enemies. We've also talked with both of you, and we've talked to Liam about Starship Troopers, which was super fun. Coming up, we're doing sort of Fall of Terror right now. So we're just doing a bunch of sort of scary movies and various types of scary movies. So we're doing Alien Romulus. Well, sorry, I'll just list all of them. We're doing Altered States with the Hit Factory guys. We're doing Alien Romulus with Scout Tafoya. We're doing I Saw the TV Glow with Emily St. James. We're doing Death Becomes Her with Sean O'Connell. And we're doing The Fly with Becca Rothfeld. So
Come on.
yeah.
Fantastic.
What a run. That's amazing.
So it should be
that's
fun.
Great. Totally.
And some of these are already in the can, and we had a really good time. Like the I Saw the TV Glow episode with Emily is great. I mean, she's just
this is one
like
of
a
the
movie
great
that was
movies I've seen this year. It's amazing.
Yeah, it was like a movie made for Emily, and she's
Totally.
like the perfect person to to think about it and think through it with. And so we had a really good time talking with her. Also, that was a movie where we both we watched it, and I was in like a really weird mood when I watched it, and that movie it just like purged my mood. It was like a palate cleanser for my mood. It was fantastic. It's such an interesting mood piece. So
Devastating in a way.
that if people
really
haven't
powerful.
seen it. Yeah, very powerful. Anyway, yeah, thanks for having us on. We're at Cowspot on Twitter, and the podcast is Cows in the Field.
We're going to have to find something to have you guys back at a future date. We'd love to have you back because this was so much fun.
Thank you.
Always a
And vice
blast.
versa. I guess we're doing
Mannequin and Vanilla Sky.
Mannequin.
Mannequin, Vanilla Sky, weirdest double feature.
What are the Jungian underpinnings, right?
Mannequin is a great pick, though.
Find out
Honestly,
soon.
it's going.
Well,
in there
I
right
was joking, but now it's starting to sound like there might be something there. So hey, I do think that James Spader's performance in that is the greatest comedic performance today.
Thank you, Justin and Laura. We had a very sweet conversation about how much we love each other's work after we finished recording that you're not going to hear because it's none of your business. But it was a lot of fun to have them on, and they're so great. Phil?
Yes. Hi, Liam.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Oh, I'm good. It's good to see you. Look, a couple things to talk about. One, the podcast is now, maybe you're watching this on YouTube, but the podcast is now available on YouTube. We're posted. We have all of our episodes available. We're going to be doing more video. We're going to be posting more video clips. We're going to be posting more YouTube. So if you're interested in watching the show as well as listening to it, check us out on YouTube. The link will be available in the notes of the show this week. Also, Spotify now allows us to leave comments. So if you want to leave comments about the episode, we would love to hear from you. You can say what you thought about the show, what you thought we just love to hear from you. Questions, comments. There's even a Q&A section that we're playing with and we're evaluating.
But
and
as Dalton said, be nice.
well, let me just
Be nice.
Speaking with that in mind, there's a really nice gentleman named Petey who has been commenting on many of our episodes on Spotify. And he wrote about our Turbulence episode from a few weeks ago. I don't think you guys need cocktails to have a good time together. Disagree, Petey, but that's fine. Good analysis of an enjoyable action movie I missed the first time around. Ray Liotta's portrayal was mesmeric, and as you said, he will be sadly missed. I did think that the heroine ending up in her vest was worthy of a mention, Die Hard DNA-wise. Also, a shout out for Brit actor Ben Cross, who sadly passed away in 2020. Ciao, Petey. Thanks, Petey. We love to hear from fans.
Well, there's a little plot twist about that, but I thought I'd let you complete that before I said anything. There's a little sting in the tail about that, because that's my dad. That's my dad.
Wait, that's your dad?
Yeah. We thought we had another fan, but it turns out we still only have the one
That's
listener.
amazing, though. That's so
But yeah,
great.
I wanted to make sure that he got his due there because I didn't know that he'd written that much, but he had said that
He's
been
commented a
commenting
bunch.
he's commented a bunch and they never came up for
Well,
whatever
because
reason.
to be honest,
on Spotify, you
I
couldn't
don't
see
pay
it.
attention that much to it, as much as I should be. But That's really cool that he did that.
Thanks, Dad. You're
thanks,
the best.
Phil's dad. Jump off, but jump in and keep listening to the show. Another person who's commented a lot on Twitter and social media is Bill Bruns, who follows us on Twitter and comments. And he wrote something a few months ago about his idea for a podcast called this is like Philcore that he calls Fugitive on a Blank, which is just movies where Tommy Lee Jones is chasing people. So U.S. Marshals, The Hunted, The Missing, and it would let you cover outside of that Enemy
Double
of the
Jeopardy?
State, Most Wanted, Born, Double Jeopardy.
That's a great idea.
Isn't it
That's
a great
idea?
idea?
Really, really great idea.
Maybe we should consider it for, I don't know, a potential subscription fee that we're talking about doing in the future. I don't know.
Interesting, because U.S. Marshals was one of those ones that was like right on the bubble as to whether it would kind of qualify or not. But I love that movie and I really want to do it. And I love The Hunted.
I've never seen The Hunted. That's a Friedkin joint, early Fried or late period Friedkin joint.
Late era Friedkin, fantastic.
I'm going to say something controversial here on this show. I love William Friedkin. Just kidding. It's not controversial at all. So look, I think what we're going to start doing here is we're going to start posting our Dick of the Movie, our categories, so people can vote in if they want to. So that's something we're going to start doing. We're still on X. Phil, you have some kind of sponsorship deal with X now? Is that what's going on? You have a fleet of Cybertrucks parked outside your house.
I hate it so much.
No, I have a question. What is your power bill every month to charge these Cybertrucks?
Well, it's between the Cybertruck and the Die Hard on a Blank lab. You know what it costs to keep that thing running. Yeah. Right. With all my contraptions, it's pretty. That's
why
sizable.
you're writing like 10 Marvel movies right now.
Invoice is substantive.
You know, we should submit it to. Maybe fans could pay your $40,000 a month power bill.
Yeah, you guys should pay for my my bills.
Come on,
if you want this quality content.
We are on X, Die Hard OAB. We are on Twitter. We are on Instagram. We are on TikTok. I'm playing with that. I posted a video myself a week ago. I'm going to convince Phil to start doing some TikToks too, whether I can talk him. He's not moving his head around.
I've been learning my Gen Z slang so I can fit in.
Hey, what's up, kids? The last thing I just wanted... Hey, guys. I just wanted to say is that something that has come up recently, or is that 2 people or 3 people in the past week have... a friend of mine, Sean Mannion, listener to the show, texted me and is like, I love the show. Are you guys going to cover Dread? The 2019? No. When did Dread come out? Do you know?
Oh, 2012, I think.
2012. And then we got an email from Ryan Holmes, who's reached out before, and he said, this might seem like a stretch, but also not completely stretch. Dread. It's Die Hard in a cyberpunk dystopian future.
We're absolutely going to do... It's always been in my... mind to do that movie. It's definitely a Die Hard movie.
Totally.
And we listen to our fans and listeners, and we take your input. We always take it seriously. And don't worry, we are going to go to Mega City 1, and that movie's great. It's fantastic.
I like it. I
I'm
watched
really
it
excited.
last year
I even
for the
thought
first
about
time.
doing the other Dread movie in comparison, but it didn't,
I am the law.
The 95 one.
You know who covered that? And I thought it was a really interesting episode was Jamel Bowie, former and future guest of the show, and John Gans, whose book I mentioned earlier. And isn't Rob Schneider in that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the less said about that,
less said about him, the better.
But I also want to say that Ryan said, we emailed him back and said, hope you're enjoying the show. And he said, thank you. I really am. Over the years, I feel like I've ingested every bit of Die Hard related media and every piece of information. Die Hard on a Blank has added so much value, and I sincerely love every episode. So thank you, Ryan.
What a lovely thing to say.
That
wasn't my dad.
We live on compliments. Yeah. His name is Ryan Gothorn. I don't know.
That's my dad under his pen name.
Your dad just goes on, downloads, deletes, downloads. That's where we get all our downloads. Well, if you're anything like PD Gothorn, jump on the podcast if you aren't a regular listener, if you're discovering us through Cows in the Field. To reiterate what Justin said, we were on their episode of Public Enemies. We'll drop the link to that in our feed as well. And I think, what am I missing? What did I miss?
Next time on the show?
Next time on the show.
Welcome to Con Air.
It's Die Hard on a prison plane. Put the bunny in the box.
I just rewatched it.
It's a masterpiece.
I had the best time ever. I cannot wait to talk about this movie. One of the classic action films of that decade. One of the classic action films ever. One of the classic Die Hard on a Blank, evolutions. Unbelievable. Like, the expression "murderers row" cast works on two different levels.
Can I make I have a fun suggestion, which is I think Con Air weirdly pairs well with John Ford's Stagecoach, which is kind of like Die Hard on a stagecoach, and I think one of the earliest iterations of the box that we've been talking about in this episode. And I definitely want to talk about Con Air as kind of a absurd action movie, but also like it's a neo-noir Western. It's a very, very strange. It is maybe the greatest supporting cast in action movie history. It's unbelievable, this movie.
Yeah, well, it's going to be really exciting to discuss that one
with a great guest.
And so we'll be back for that one.
We'll be back next time with the most deranged tea party you've ever seen. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.